Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. This video is very special because I'm going to talk about my go-to languages for 2021. Now, these are not necessarily the best languages in the world. I don't know if you can even call a language the best language in the world, but these are based on my experiences and the types of programming that I like to do, the way that I like to do programming. These are the languages that I have found so far in 2021 to be the most appropriate language for what I'm doing. So they are my go-to languages. And if you do work similar to what I do, you might find them to be similarly appropriate. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is the Dev Parkour's Go-To Language Awards of 2021. So we have a few categories. We have systems, we have backend for web, front end for web, desktop, mobile, and edge/IoT. Now I will say that some of these categories I have far more experience in than with others. Front end and back end web, desktop and mobile, that's where I have most of my experience. Systems, I dabble there, so I have more experience than other areas, but not as much as the ones that I've done for a day job for the last 15 years. And then edge IoT, here and there I get into things, so take these with a grain of salt. Again, these are based on my experiences. So let's start with the first category, systems. And the finalists are C and C++, C#, Go, and Rust. And my pick is Rust. This probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to most of you. I did a video a while back on why I think Rust is the language of the future. It's actually the most watched video on my channel. Gotten a lot of good feedback on that. A lot of people seem to agree with me, and I'm sure there are plenty who disagree with me. But I really think that Rust is the best language in my book for this, and it's definitely going to be my go-to language. The reason that I moved away from C and C++ is just because the languages are kind of older, and there are more modern ways to deal with some of the the memory management concepts that in my mind Rust makes really easy. But when I first came to Rust, I was looking for something a little bit more modern, a little bit easier to use, with a little bit better tooling than C and C++. C and C++ still great languages, but they're a little more primitive. C# and Go for me are out just because they're garbage collected. C#, great language. I love C#. I've been writing C# for years and years and years. It's a fantastic language. But for me, the fact that it's garbage collected and the fact that it's so high level makes it not necessarily appropriate for a systems level language. Go was definitely a contender. The fact that it's garbage collected is a mark against it for the systems application. And I never found the tooling to be very good. I tried using Go, but I feel like when I, not being familiar enough with Go to know exactly what I was doing, when I would do something wrong, the error messages that I got back were not very intuitive. And it wasn't until I actually had, valid syntax or everything exactly the way it was supposed to be before I would get helpful feedback, which Rust gives fantastic feedback. It tells me exactly what's wrong and exactly what I need to fix. I just really like Rust. I really like the experience that I've had with it over the past couple months. All right, so our next category is web backend. And our finalists here are PHP, Java, C#, Ruby on Rails, Python, and Go. This list could go on and on and on. There are tons of languages that are used on the back end for web. But I tried to keep it to this list because these are languages that I've actually used, not necessarily all in production, but I've used them for web. Python is kind of the odd one here that I tried to use it, and there are a few different routes to go with Python on the web. You can use Django. There's something called WSGI. I think there's something called web.py. There are a few different ways that you can build Python web applications, and I've tried out a few of them. Never got far enough to get to production. So I guess that kind of gives away that Python is not the answer here. So what is my choice? My choice is C# for backend. I am a C# developer, and I've been writing C# for a long time. I really like it as a language. It's gotten more modern with the newer versions. They've added a lot of cool features. It's a great language, and because of its lineage, it was built pretty much for ASP.NET. It is designed for the web. The .NET framework has a lot of good support for web applications, and I think actually .NET Conf is going on right now. I'm sure they're talking about all the different things that they have built on top of C# for web. Blazor, Razor Pages, ASP.NET MVC, gRPC, all of this stuff is there for you basically out of the box. You can just use it. So in my mind, C# is a great language for that. And with the web, it doesn't matter that C# is garbage collected. Even if you went with Go on the web, it doesn't matter that Go is garbage collected, because typically with the request response model, you will have time after the completion of a request to do a garbage collection cycle. So that's not an issue. It's more, on the system side, you might need that pretty much continuous operation where you might not have time for a garbage collection cycle. So let's move on. For this category, front end on web, the finalists are a little bit weird because browsers basically have one option, JavaScript. I kind of went in the direction of frameworks here instead of arguing over should you use JavaScript or TypeScript, should you use CoffeeScript, it doesn't really matter. But I think that the distinction here is really between the frameworks. So I have jQuery, Angular, React, Vue.js, Razor, and Blazor. If you don't know what Razor and Blazor are, they are from the C# world. Blazor is basically C# that can run in a browser. That's client-side Blazor. You can write server-side Blazor, which is basically Razor pages that kind of render over a WebSocket connection. That's also pretty cool. Razor is basically static HTML generated on the server, but it is a kind of a templating language all to its own. So jQuery, Angular, React, and Vue.js you've probably already heard of. So what is my choice? My choice is React. And this is for a couple different reasons. When I first started getting into the realm of true front-end frameworks, the Angular, React, Vue.js of the world, the way I thought about web front ends, Vue.js really made sense. But the more I started using TypeScript, and the more I started looking at JavaScript as a real programming language, I'd say, and wanting to get those references and be able to navigate throughout the code with the tools that I was using, Visual Studio Code most of the time, React is basically just straight JavaScript. So you reference something, you can very easily find all references, go to definition, that sort of thing. Vue.js, when you create the Vue.js object, there's some magic processing in the background that happens to turn it into an actual JavaScript object that you can't see. You can interact with it in other parts of the code, but what you have written isn't what the rest of the code actually interacts with. And from a development standpoint now, I find that a little bit confusing. And it's actually a little bit frustrating when I go back to, I have a fairly large Vue.js application that I still maintain here and there. So next category, desktop. For finalists on desktop, I have the following: C++, Java, C#, Swift, and Electron. I tried to get a variety in there because obviously C# with Windows Forms and with WPF is Windows specific. Swift is Mac OS specific. I didn't want to leave out any platform. Electron is obviously cross-platform. Java also cross-platform, and C++ can be cross-platform. But I also wanted to get the full spectrum of, very low level C++, very native, all the way to, platform agnostic, very high level with the electrons of the world. So my choice for this is actually C++. And the reason that I picked C++ is, well, mainly Java, I feel like, has kind of stagnated as a language. It has not kept pace with modern language features the way that C# has, even though for our purposes they're about the same age. I think Java is actually older, but C# has really kept pace with modern features and has features now that it didn't have, and the original creators of C# couldn't have even imagined when they were first building C#. Java just recently got lambdas and still has no native property feature. I know that's just syntactic sugar, but because it's such a small, simple piece of syntactic sugar to implement, I think that's a key part of. It indicates where you're going as a language, what your vision is for your language. So Java is kind of discounted immediately on that front. I just don't think it's a great language to be writing in. The write once, compile once, run anywhere model is fantastic, and that actually, for the most part, you can get from C#. Of course, for the UI stuff, I already mentioned that it's platform specific, which is kind of a mark against both it and Swift. I was looking for something that was cross-platform. Electron, it's compelling, but there are still some things that, if you really want native performance or native access to what's going on the machine, Electron just isn't going to cut it, which really meant that C++ was the only general purpose, and by that I mean not just you can do the vast majority of things that people want to do with it, but you can legitimately do everything you might want to do on desktop. C++ is really the only option there. All right, next category, mobile. Now for mobile, we have a few different options, and even some that I didn't list here. We've got Swift and Kotlin, obviously, the native tools for iOS and Android respectively. C# using Xamarin, and JavaScript. And in this case, I specifically called out React Native as the tools that you'd use JavaScript with. Another one that's popular these days is Flutter. That didn't make it onto this list just because I don't have very much experience with Flutter. So my choice is C# with Xamarin. Now this could just be because I'm a C# developer, and I actually used Xamarin in the early days before they were part of Microsoft. I really like what Xamarin started doing and what it's been doing. The tooling has gotten so much better since then, and what they're doing with Xamarin Forms is fantastic. The really nice thing about the entire Xamarin ecosystem is that you can basically pretend to be as platform agnostic as you want, or be as down to the bare metal as you want. You could totally feasibly write an iOS app that is iOS only code, but still using C#, and then write a separate Android application. Or you could write 99% of your application in common code that will run on both iOS and Android, and have just a very small shim that provides the native interop on each side. Both are viable models, and you can do anything in between. You can have as much power over the underlying platform as you want, or you can kind of take a step back and be, basically pretend you're in the React Native Electron PhoneGap world, where you're just writing JavaScript and something happens to make it run on the device. So I really think C# and Xamarin are the best they're still my go-to. Even I have a couple mobile apps that are kind of on the horizon that I might get into. I've toyed around with using React Native, but for me, the story behind Xamarin is so compelling that I'm probably going to stick with Xamarin. And our final category, Edge and IoT. Our finalists here are Python, JavaScript, and C/C++. Now, the reason that I say C/C++ and in previous categories I called out C++ specifically is because here I don't think it really makes much of a difference. If you want classes and objects, you use C++. If you don't, you use C. I mean, that's an oversimplification. In some of the other categories, like for instance on desktop, it doesn't really make sense to use straight C for desktop programming because a lot of the frameworks are C++. Qt, sometimes it's pronounced Qt, is my go-to framework on desktop. It is a C++ framework, so that kind of inherently means that I'm using C++ when I'm writing on desktop. So my choice for this category is C and C++. Now, I do want to say that doesn't mean that JavaScript and Python are bad by any stretch of the imagination. I still use Python as a language for prototyping a lot of times. It has a really good REPL, read, execute, print loop, so I can just type things that I want to test out, see the results right away. I can kind of build up state as I go. It's an interactive programming model. Fantastic. And on IoT, as you're prototyping, Python can still be great as well. And then you can combine it all into a single script or program, run it, nothing wrong with that. Similarly with JavaScript, JavaScript can have a pretty good CLI, interactive coding experience. But ultimately, IoT devices tend to be very resource starved. And for what I'm doing, typically I want a little bit better performance than just what I can get from a Python interpreter or a JavaScript interpreter. So long term, I might prototype in Python or JavaScript, but then I'll convert it into C or C++ to actually run on a regular basis, just to get that as much performance out of it as I possibly can. So to recap, here are our winners. So for systems programming, we have Rust. For web backend, we have C#. For front end, we have React. Desktop, C++. Mobile, C# specifically with the Xamarin framework. And for Edge IoT, C or C++. So those are my go-to languages of 2021. If you have any thoughts, comments, disagreements, questions, maybe I didn't go into depth about why I chose a particular language, and you're still curious about it, go ahead and leave a comment down below. And I'm curious to hear what your go-to languages are of 2021, and what you'll be using on into 2022. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Please consider subscribing if you're new to the channel. If you're not already subscribed, click that notification bell so you'll get notified when a new video comes out. And comment, add questions, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.